Imagine a tiny, just a single line of malicious code hidden in a routine software update. And it takes down an entire hospital's network on the exact same day that a drone strike in the Middle East spikes the price of your evening commute.
Right, yeah. Which sounds like the plot of a movie, but it's really not.
No, not at all. Usually when we look at the news or study a business trend, we tend to put things in these neat, separate little boxes just to keep from getting totally overwhelmed, I think.
Oh, absolutely. It gives us this illusion of order.
Yeah.
We like to think that what happens in a cloud data center half a world away has, absolutely nothing to do with the price of a gallon of gas. Or, for that matter, how burned out you feel working from your kitchen table.
Right. But today, we're taking a sledgehammer to those boxes because we're doing a deep dive into a stack of sources that, well, at first glance, they seem completely disconnected.
Very disconnected.
We've got the current conflict in the Middle East, a massive flurry of new 2026 state privacy laws, some huge software supply chain hacks, and the ongoing war over remote work. And our mission for this deep dive is to show you how these events are intimately, physically, and digitally colliding.
It's a super complex web, for sure. But I promise, if we trace the cause and effect here, the invisible threads connecting these massive global events right down to your daily life, your job, your data, it's all going to become crystal clear.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because the scale of the physical shock to the global system right now is just staggering. And just to be very clear up front, we're entirely neutral here.
Yes, absolutely. We're not taking any political sides, just strictly reporting what's in the source material regarding the U.S., Israel, and Iran conflict.
Exactly. So based on the reports, the situation is escalating really rapidly. Donald Trump has publicly threatened to basically obliterate Iran's energy infrastructure if the Strait of Hormuz isn't reopened.
Right, he specifically named Karg Island, I believe.
Yeah, Karg Island, which is Iran's main oil export hub. He also targeted critical oil wells and desalination plants in those threats.
And then on the diplomatic front, the U.S. has actually presented a 15-point ceasefire proposal that's being mediated by Pakistan right now.
But Iran countered that, right?
They did, yeah. They came back with an entirely different set of demands. They want an immediate halt to attacks on their regional allies, heavy reparations for war damage, and the complete removal of U.S. military bases from the Middle East.
Wow. And the Houthis are involved now, too?
Right. Houthi forces have actively entered the conflict.
Yeah.
So that just adds this highly unpredictable layer of regional instability to a mix that was, frankly, already incredibly volatile.
And the geographic focal point for all of this is the Strait of Hormuz. For those who don't know, it's this really narrow waterway, but it facilitates up to 15% of the entire global oil supply.
Which is massive.
It is. Our sources note that historically, a blockage of this magnitude carries the risk of an 80 to 100% spike in global oil prices.
Yeah, that's a doubling of the price of oil overnight.
The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has already issued this stark warning. They literally said all roads lead to higher prices and slower economic growth.
And that physical blockage is exactly what is paralyzing the global financial system right now. Central banks are entirely trapped by this physical supply chain vulnerability.
Wait, okay, hold on. If the U.S. labor market is actually showing clear signs of cooling down, like companies are hiring less, job growth is slowing, why on earth are central banks refusing to cut interest rates? Are they really prioritizing some theoretical inflation target over actual people losing their jobs?
Well, it's not a theoretical target, really. It's a mechanical reality of how inflation works. I mean, the Federal Reserve just held their interest rates steady at 3.5 to 3.75%.
Right. And the European Central Bank held too.
Exactly. The ECB held at 2.15%. And they are doing this because inflation is what economists call sticky.
Sticky inflation, right.
Yeah. In the U.S., the PCE, that's the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, the Fed's preferred metric, it's hovering between 2.8 and 3.0%.
Yeah.
And that number is being driven almost entirely by these energy shocks.
Because oil is in everything.
Exactly. Think about it. Oil isn't just the gas in your car. It's the cost of shipping goods across the ocean, manufacturing plastics, powering industrial farms. When oil spikes, the price of literally everything else has to go up.
So even if the job market is weakening, the Fed literally can't lower borrowing costs to help businesses. Because if they lower rates, that stimulates spending, which just makes the oil-driven inflation even worse.
Precisely. You cannot print more oil. So monetary policy is completely neutralized by geopolitics right now.
That's wild.
I know. Fed Vice Chair Michelle Bowman actually penciled in 3 rate cuts for 2026 to try and support the labor market. but the median projection from the rest of the Fed is just one single cut.
So they're just forced to sit on their hands.
Basically, yeah. They have to watch while a geopolitical crisis drives the baseline cost of living through the roof.
Okay, so physical conflict freezes the economy. We get that. But the conflict isn't just staying in the physical world, is it? It's bleeding directly into the digital infrastructure that you and I rely on every single second.
Oh, totally. We're seeing the lines between physical and digital infrastructure completely dissolve. Recently, Iranian drone strikes physically targeted and hit Amazon Web Services data centers in the UAE and Bahrain.
Well, they bombed AWS.
Yes, and they didn't just blow up a building, they simultaneously disrupted 60 different cloud services across the entire region. A physical weapon created a massive digital blackout.
That is genuinely terrifying. But, you know, reading through these cybersecurity reports we have, what scares me even more are the purely digital supply chain attacks.
Right, the silent ones.
Exactly. The sources say these attacks now account for 30% of all data breaches. That's double from last year. And on average, it takes an organization 267 days to even realize they've been breached.
Almost a year.
Yeah, at a cost of nearly $5 million per incident.
And the mechanism behind these hacks really explains why they take so long to detect. It's the absolute failure of the old trust by default security model.
What do you mean by trust by default?
Well, it used to be that if you built a strong firewall around your company, you were generally safe. You kept the bad guys out. But hackers adapted. Think of a corporate network like a municipal water system.
Okay.
Instead of trying to break the heavy locks on a million individual homes, hackers just pour a vial of poison into the city's main water reservoir. And then the homes automatically pump the poison inside themselves.
Because the poison is hiding inside a routine, trusted software update, you literally invite the attackers in like a vampire.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, you invite them right into your house.
And the speed of these hacks in 2026 is just wild. There was this threat group called UNC 6426 that compromised an open source tool on NPM.
Yeah.
For those who aren't developers listening, NPM is basically a massive public library of pre-written code. Millions of engineers borrow from it to build their apps faster.
Right, saves them tons of time.
Exactly. But once the hackers poisoned that library, it took them just 72 hours to gain full administrator access to corporate AWS environments. 72 hours.
It's incredibly fast.
Yeah.
Or look at the Langflow AI flaw. Langflow is a tool used to build artificial intelligence applications. When a vulnerability in it was publicly disclosed, attackers were actively exploiting it within 20 hours.
20 hours, so you don't even have a day to fix it.
No. There is no longer a grace period for security teams to patch their systems. It's an immediate race.
The scale is what gets me. Look at the Glassworm campaign. Attackers used stolen credentials to push 72 malicious extensions into Visual Studio Code. And that's the default text editor that millions of programmers use to write software every day.
And then there was the Team PCP backdoor, hidden in a popular Python package called LetLM.
Right.
That package acts as a gateway for AI applications, and is present in 36% of all cloud environments. 36%.
That's over a third of the cloud. And this isn't just, theoretical data sitting on a server somewhere. The real-world panic is totally palpable. There was a critical flaw in PTC Windchill, which is a software used to manage industrial manufacturing. The risk of hackers remotely taking over physical factory machinery was so high that German police were literally going door to door to warn companies.
Wow.
Yeah. And we saw a medtech giant, Stryker, taken completely offline by an Iran-linked wiper attack. The hackers stole 50 terabytes of sensitive health data before just wiping the servers clean.
So if the digital perimeter is dead,
Right.
and hackers are already inside the house via these supply chain updates, you can't just rely on a firewall anymore.
No, you can't.
What's fascinating here is how the cybersecurity industry is being forced to pivot. Organizations are rapidly adopting NDR. That stands for Network Detection and Response.
How does that differ from a firewall?
So instead of guarding the front door, NDR acts like an internal security camera. It uses AI to continuously monitor how data is behaving after it's already inside the network.
Oh, I see.
So if a trusted software update suddenly starts trying to, export 50 terabytes of data to an unknown server in the middle of the night, the system flags it.
It spots the weird behavior.
Exactly. There's also this massive mandated push for SBOMs, which is a software bill of materials. It's essentially an FDA nutritional label for software.
I love that comparison.
Yeah, it forces vendors to list every single piece of third-party code hidden inside their application. So companies actually know what they're installing.
But even with those tools, the sheer volume of data being exposed is staggering. Which kind of brings us to the next piece of this puzzle. Because corporate networks can no longer be trusted to keep hackers out, state governments are aggressively stepping in.
They really are.
They're mandating that consumer data be minimized, locked down, or just deleted, so that if a hacker does get in, there is nothing of value to steal. Welcome to data privacy in 2026.
It is a monumental legislative shift. I mean, we now have 20 U.S. states with comprehensive privacy laws actively on the books.
20 seats.
Yeah. Just on January 1st of 2026, severe new laws took effect in Indiana, Kentucky, and Rhode Island. And Rhode Island is particularly notable because it has an incredibly low threshold.
How low?
The law applies to any entity processing the data of just 35,000 consumers. So that loops in thousands of small businesses that previously completely flew under the radar.
And California, as always, is leading the charge on this, right? They enacted aggressive new rules for data brokers. If a company collects and sells your data, they now have to explicitly disclose if that data is being sold to foreign actors or to generative AI developers who use it to train their models.
Right. And they've also mandated a strict 45-day window to process user deletion requests.
Plus, California also enacted strict new health data protections. They specifically banned the use of geofencing around in-person healthcare and family planning facilities.
Right, so for context, geofencing is when a company draws a digital perimeter around a physical location to track the phones of anyone who walks inside. California has basically made it illegal to track people seeking medical care in that way.
Which makes a lot of sense. And other states are targeting entirely different vulnerabilities, like Oregon is cracking down on children's data. They strictly prohibited the sale of data for anyone under 16. Yeah, and they also banned the sale of precise geolocation data tracking a person within a 1,750-foot radius. Nebraska is implementing a new age-appropriate design code for apps. And Texas brought in the Responsible AI Governance Act.
Right, the Texas one is huge.
It really is. It puts heavy restrictions on using biometric data like your face or your voice to train AI models without explicit informed consent.
Well, okay, let me stop you there because looking at this from a business perspective makes no sense.
What do you mean?
If I am a software company trying to build a unified digital product for a national audience, I now have 20 different states with 20 completely contradictory sets of rules.
Yeah, that's true.
Nebraska wants one thing for kids, Texas wants another for AI, California is banning geofencing. How do you even build an app in that environment? Isn't this creating an absolute compliance nightmare?
Oh, it is a logistical nightmare, completely. But mechanically, what happens in the industry is known as the California effect.
The California effect.
Yeah. Because it's just too expensive and technically complex to build 20 different state-specific versions of an app, companies are basically forced to adopt the strictest state's rules across the board for all users just to survive.
Oh, I see.
So if California mandates a 45-day deletion window, the company just builds that feature for everyone, everywhere.
But this raises an important question, doesn't it? As highly technical laws like Texas's AI Governance Act come into play, we have to wonder if state legislators truly understand the technology they're actually regulating.
That's a very fair point.
Is there a risk that this fractured state-by-state regulatory landscape ends up throttling AI innovation entirely before federal lawmakers can even agree on a unified standard?
It's a massive risk. But I want to pivot away from the laws themselves for a minute and look at who is actually running this race. Who is the person tasked with monitoring those network detection systems, untangling these 20 conflicting state privacy laws, and navigating a corporate budget that's squeezed by geopolitical inflation?
Right. Who is doing the work?
Exactly. And the answer is, it's a workforce that is largely sitting in their living rooms.
Yes. The human element at the center of this deep dive is incredibly revealing. According to the 2026 data, 22.8% of the U.S. workforce, and that is over 34.3 million people, are working remotely, at least part-time.
34 million people.
Yeah. And of the roles that actually can be done remotely, 52% of those workers are currently on a hybrid schedule.
But the disconnect between the executives in the boardroom and the employees in the living room is staggering. The data shows that 61% of companies currently have strict return to office or RTO mandates in place.
Right.
Yet, simultaneously, 8 in 10 companies openly admit they have lost key talent, specifically because they enforce those exact mandates.
Researchers actually call this phenomenon productivity paranoia.
Productivity paranoia.
Yeah. 85% of business leaders admit they do not trust that offsite employees are actually being productive. But the economic data comprehensively dismantles that fear.
Really?
A major study by the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed that a 1% increase in remote work actually correlates to a 0.08% increase in total factor productivity.
Okay, so for the audience, total factor productivity being the economic measure of how efficiently a business turns inputs, like labor and capital, into actual output.
Exactly. So the workers aren't just doing the same amount of work at home, they're producing more value per hour. Furthermore, the gold standard Stanford University study tracked this extensively and found that hybrid work models have zero negative impact on performance.
Is zero.
Zero. And they drop employee turnover by a staggering 33%.
Wow. And the money saved is massive. Employers save an average of $11,000 a year for every remote worker by reducing real estate and overhead costs.
It's huge.
Yeah, and the employees save between $2,000 and $7,000 a year. Plus, they get back anywhere from 55 to 72 minutes a day of commute time. And hey, from an environmental standpoint, remote work reduces an employee's carbon footprint by 54%.
But we cannot ignore the dark side of this arrangement either.
True, it's not all perfect.
The complete collapse of the boundary between home and office is taking a severe toll. 86% of fully remote workers are reporting active burnout, and 81% admit to regularly checking their email outside of standard work hours.
Because when your office is your kitchen table, you never truly leave work.
Exactly. To combat this, we are seeing the rise of non-invasive monitoring tools, like a platform called WorkTime, for example.
How does that work?
Well, instead of using creepy invasive tactics like logging a worker's keystrokes or taking random screenshots of their monitor.
The worst.
Yeah, terrible. But instead of that, these tools simply track active time in different applications, just to detect the early behavioral signs of burnout.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. The sources indicate that 69% of workers would actually take a pay cut just to maintain their remote status.
Nearly 70%.
Yeah. So if the data clearly proves that remote work increases efficiency, drops turnover by a third, saves the company millions, and the employees actively want it, why are CEOs still so obsessed with forcing people back to a physical desk? Is this just a massive executive ego trip to justify their expensive commercial real estate?
Honestly, it's less about real estate ego and more about a fundamental lack of psychological adaptation.
How do you mean?
CEOs are trying to manage a 2026 digital workforce using a 1920s factory floor mindset.
Oh, wow.
The tools to successfully manage a distributed workforce absolutely exist, but many traditional leaders just lack the psychological framework to manage by evaluating the actual outcomes of the work.
Right, measuring results.
Exactly. It's much easier for a manager to just count the hours an employee sits visibly at a desk and call that productivity. This is a failure of management philosophy, not a failure of the remote work model itself.
So the old frameworks for managing a business are completely breaking down, which segues perfectly into our final piece of source material, because it asks the ultimate question. How on earth does a modern leader balance all of this?
It's a lot to balance.
You have a geopolitical oil shock driving sticky inflation, a digital supply chain that is constantly compromised from within, 20 fragmented state privacy laws, and a burned-out remote workforce fighting management over return-to-office mandates. You can't just throw all of those variables into an Excel spreadsheet.
No, you really can't. Relying solely on a financial ledger is entirely inadequate to measure the reality of a modern global business. And this brings us to a concept introduced by the Capitalist Coalition called the Integrated Decision-Making Framework.
Okay, walk me through how this works mechanically.
Sure. The core concept is that organizations must fundamentally expand their definition of value.
Yeah.
You can no longer just measure financial capital, money and assets.
Right.
You have to equally weigh natural capital, which is the environment and resources, social capital, which is your relationships with communities and institutions, and human capital, which is the health, skills, and well-being of your workforce.
So it's 4 pillars instead of 1.
Exactly. The principles of this framework demand that leaders look at the interconnected systems surrounding their business, apply appropriate attribution for their impacts, and actively address how these different forms of capital affect all stakeholders.
It makes me think of, like, upgrading from a flat 2D paper map to a 3D interactive globe. On the flat map, you just see the borders. On the globe, you finally see how the mountain ranges actually dictate the weather patterns thousands of miles away.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
So if we apply that to everything we've talked about today, a leader might see that saving money by ditching expensive office real estate, which boosts your financial capital, and reducing commuting emissions, which boosts your natural capital, has to be carefully weighed against the risk of remote worker isolation and burnout, which drains your human capital.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, The companies that are stubbornly staring only at their financial capital spreadsheets are the exact same companies getting completely blindsided by the modern world.
Right.
They are the ones whose systems are taken down and held for ransom because they didn't invest in securing their digital supply chain. And they're the ones suffering mass employee resignations because they issued rigid, hours-based return-to-office mandates.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive by saying we were going to smash the boxes that separate the news, and I think we did.
I'd say so.
A physical conflict in the Middle East threatens to block the Strait of Hormuz, driving up the cost of energy. That sticky inflation paralyzes central banks from cutting interest rates, squeezing corporate budgets. Meanwhile, digital hackers bypass corporate firewalls entirely by pouring poison into the software supply chains that we implicitly trust.
And it doesn't stop there.
No. Because the networks are breached, state governments are forced to throw up fragmented legislative walls to protect consumer privacy, and trying to hold this entire chaotic, interconnected system together is a burned-out remote workforce. The only way forward for a company or a society is integrated, holistic thinking that values human and natural capital just as highly as the dollar.
Absolutely.
And for you, listening to this, I think it's worth taking a hard look at your own personal supply chains. What trusted digital tools are running in the background of your life? And more importantly, are you protecting your own human capital? Are you setting boundaries against burnout while trying to navigate this increasingly complex world?
It is a vital question to ask yourself as we all adapt to this landscape. And I'll leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up here.
Oh, let's hear it.
We have seen physical wars actively target cloud data centers. And we are seeing digital AI tools being used to compromise physical infrastructure. As these two worlds completely merge over the next few years, and as AI agents begin to autonomously manage our digital workflows, basically acting as our full-time digital coworkers,
Yeah.
will we eventually reach a point where we need to grant human capital protections to our AI to prevent them from burning out?